having to do with those topics. So hopefully today we can get a little bit of that out. So let's start off here with a little bit of money, because I have promised in the previous show that I would be doing a more discussion about money, not necessarily your finances, but just about how this stuff all works. And I have mentioned in the past that fiat money is the kind of money we have today. I used to talk about this in the 70s and 80s, and nobody listened. And then I talked about it again in the 90s and the early 2000s, and still nobody listened. Even up until recently, when I would go to the bank, I would ask them, do you know what fiat money is? And I would get a blank stare. So I always thought we should really talk about money periodically. And I'll tell you what, more and more people now are talking about fiat money. Why? Because that's the worst money in the world when it comes to security. But it's the best money in the world if you wanted to buy and sell stuff. So, it's got its pros and cons. And the con is that, well, let me tell you the pro first. The pro side of this is that it's easier to buy and sell things when you have fiat money, because it's paper in your pocket. You don't have to carry gold coins and silver or copper and pennies. And then the credit card is even better, because the credit card doesn't even have any paper. It has an electronic accounting system. As a matter of fact, I use that credit card. I pay for everything on my credit card. And then at the end of the month, I take my money out of the bank and I go to the other bank and I pay off my credit card directly in cash. Why do I do that? Because it's my accounting system. It's the easiest way for me to do it. And when you get old, you have to think about these things. Now, what's the negative about it? The negative about it is this. Somebody else is in control of the value of the money. Now, granted, if somebody comes to you and says, I want to buy your car, and I'll pay you cash, and I'm going to pay it in $100 bills. Based on law, that's legal tender, and you have to take it. Now, they could pay you by a check or some other method, but that's what the law says, written right on the bills that you have. But the money you have used to be able to be redeemed for gold or silver. But that's all changed. The fact that it changed, I'm not going to get into when and how, but it changed. And now it's a piece of paper. So, when you study finance, they talk about promissory notes. And the promissory note is kind of like a promise to pay a bill in some fashion. And that could be a check. A check is a promissory note, because you promise that if somebody goes to the bank with your check, they will get cash from it, dollar bills, if you will. And that's okay. But when you look at the money you have today, take one out of your wallet and take a look at it. I don't care whether it's $1, $5, $10, $20, $50, or $100 bill. By the way, you don't have $500 bills anymore. You don't have $1,000 bills anymore. They don't exist. Not for your use. And look at the top, and it says Federal Reserve Note. And they call these promissory notes. They're promising to reimburse the person who has it. For what? There's no way. It's just a medium of exchange. And as long as everybody has good faith in it, not a problem. But what happens when you don't have faith in it? Well, all I can say is we might be headed in that direction, and you should learn about fiat money. And the best book I have read about fiat money, and there's a number of books that have been written about it, but the one I like the best is a very short book, and it's called Fiat Money, Inflation in France. Fiat like the car, but it's not the car. It's about money. And if you read that book and you're in your 50s or 60s or somewhere in that range, you'll say to yourself, what I'm reading in that book that they did in France in 1790, They're doing that today. And so when you get to the end of the book, you'll find out what the result is. And it always is. Okay, so I want to go to the banking system. And, if you have a credit card, sometimes the bank sends you a notice. And they will tell you they've changed the terms. So I looked at what type of terms they have changed in a recent notice that was sent to a relative of mine. And this said, what does Citibank do with your personal information? Well, I think that's a good thing to know these days. And it says what? And it says the types of personal information we collect and share depend on the product or service you have with us. And this information can include your social security number and your income, account balances and employment information, your credit history and transaction history. And it goes on to say that you can limit their sharing. Now, I got to tell you, it says there's reasons we can share your personal information for their everyday business purposes. I don't have a problem with that as long as it's internal within the company. But then it says for our marketing purposes, for joint marketing with other financial companies. Maybe they want to sell your debt. I don't know. For affiliates, everyday business purposes. Well, if the bank has other affiliates that they're involved with, you didn't know that. They didn't give you a list of who they were. Well, maybe they would. You didn't bother to read it anyway. Or for our affiliates to market to you. So you start getting all these emails and junk mail, and you wonder, where's it coming from? This is an example. And for non-affiliates to market to you. Now, out of all those things, you can limit the affiliates' everyday business purposes. You can limit their ability, both affiliates and non-affiliates, to market to you. That means people affiliated with their company and not affiliated if they're sharing the information. So how do you limit the sharing of this information? When you are no longer a customer, we're going to continue to share your information as described in this notice. Did you know you signed on for a lifetime of sharing your information according to this notice? I certainly didn't know that. I thought when we're done, we're done. But evidently you have a lifetime of sharing your personal information. God forbid they should ever catch me coming out of the shower. I don't want to share that. Now, maybe you have a question about how to deal with this. Well, you can call up and they give you an 800 number. Now, one of the questions, and they have a Q&A, question and answer on the back. And it says here, why can't I limit all sharing? And it says, federal law gives you the right to limit sharing for affiliates using your information to market to you, sharing for non-affiliates to market to you, and state laws and individual companies may give you additional rights to limit sharing. So when you want to know what the laws are, you need to know who provided the information for those laws to be written. And guess who writes the laws? The people who want the changes. And then they submit them to a legislator who carries the ball. And for that, they get a campaign contribution down the road. Or maybe they already got one, and so that's how they open up the books. Now, there are some states that have additional requirements, but according to this article, is Vermont and California. Well, everybody's leaving California, so we can forget about that. Now, the other part of this notice that they sent was they were changing the late fees. Oh, good. I'm glad they're going to reduce my late charges. No, that's not quite how it works. According to this, the revised terms as of June 5th, and this is coming right up, June 5th, the late fee is going to be increased from $35 to $40. Now, what about a late fee? How does this work? Well, let's say you have a bill for $15 and you kind of forgot to pay it, and you pay it the next day. The late charge is $40. They're doing you a favor. Well, not. Now, then they go on here and they explain this. We are increasing the late fee, it says, based on your credit card agreement. And you may be required to pay more of your account balance each cycle as a result of being late. So it isn't just that you pay the penalty. You might wind up having to have a bigger payment. Why? Because you're scared to death you won't make the payments. Well, guess what? Let's say you're having trouble every month trying to make that payment. Now they're going to increase your ability, your difficulty in trying to make that payment. So if you were paying $30 a month and they increased it to $80 a month to kind of get you off the books quicker, what if you don't have the $80 a month? Well, then there's that late fee we were talking about. Okay, so also it says here that penalties, fees, and there's now they've described this fee. And it says here they've changed this. The late fee was actually increased to $40. However, the fee will be $29 or $40 for any additional past due payment during the next 6 billing cycles after a past due payment. The fee will not exceed the amount permitted by law. It doesn't say the fee can't exceed how much you were late. I mean, how much did it hurt them when you were $15 late on a credit card payment? Not at all. Not the kind of money they're dealing with. And then the last thing I saw on this notice was we also add the largest of the following. Now, this is really important. They add the largest of the calculated new balance if it's less than $29. They add $29 if the calculated new balance is at least $29, or 1% of the calculated new balance, and on and on and on. That's an item. One of the things we're going to be talking about today is the law and what we expect and what we have no clue about. And believe me, you have no clue. Did you go to school? You went to elementary school for 8 years and then high school for 4 years. Well, maybe some people 5 or 6, but maybe some people 3. Some people actually got through high school in 3 years and had completed all the required subjects, so they were able to graduate in 3 years. Smart move on their part. And if every student knew they could do that, maybe more people would buckle down and do their damnedest to get out early. So I ran across, since we're on the subject of money here, I ran across a financial aid coming from the federal government to the state of Nevada. And as I calculated this out, and I'm going to do this on the next show when we talk a little more about money, but when you want to know where the power lies, it's always where the money is or goes. The only way that people have power is to destroy things. Now, I have a question, and maybe somebody out there may know the answer. So let me give out the phone number. I'll give it out a couple of times today. 775-990-4900. If you didn't get a chance to write it down, I'll bring it up again in a few minutes. So, George Putnam, when he did his radio shows in LA, always used to say, if you want to know where the corruption is, follow the money. Now, today, if you watch this video on either Facebook or YouTube or wherever you look, you'll notice in the back of my screen a picture of the 230 kV transmission sale and how they were going to use the proceeds. I've talked to them blue in the face about this, so have some others, but we may come back to that again. So when I looked at the numbers, Las Vegas, Reno, North Las Vegas, Henderson, and Sparks, and Carson City got a total of almost $500 million. The largest amount going to, well, actually, it's kind of surprising. Clark County got $440 million just from the feds because they could print money and send it over and help them out. I don't know who's going to pay it back. Oh, yes, you are if you live there. And then Las Vegas got $130 million. And believe me, the money that went to Clark County did not go to Las Vegas. It went to county operations. And then when you talk about North Las Vegas, they got $46 million. Henderson got $37 million. A lot of money sitting there, folks. Oh, and Nye County got $9 million. What are they going to do with that $9 million? I think hopefully they're going to use it to build the dog pound. I think they should go pound salt, but that's another story. It was published in the newspaper, by the way. So if you were to get a subscription or read the newspaper, you would find it in there. There's one other thing about money I wanted to bring up. And this was also about, this is about your broadband service. Did you know that Americans can begin applying for $50 off their monthly internet bill? It's part of an emergency government program to keep people connected during the pandemic, which evidently is almost over, but we're starting a new one. I can't wait till we get to the new pandemic. It'll be exciting. So the program is worth $3.2 billion and is part of the December pandemic relief package. The government's increasing spending on broadband as the pandemic underscored the fact that millions of Americans did not have access at a time when jobs, school, and healthcare were moving online. How can you have online training if you don't have a computer or you don't have the internet? So this is important. You got to have this stuff, and that's where it came. So, if, for example, if your household is eligible, if you receive food stamps, you have a child in the free or reduced price school lunch program, you use Medicaid, or you lost income during the pandemic and made $99,000 for single filers and $189,000 for joint filers. Now, if you're making $189,000 into your family and you didn't have any money in the bank to weather the storm, shame on you. Pooey. There's some other eligibility requirements, but you'd have to contact the government to find out what they are. Okay. So now that I've unloaded, I feel a little better. Not great, but a little better. You know, money is tied to corruption and other things. And, you know, there was a big deal about, since I mentioned pandemic here, there was a panel in Geneva that reviewed the World Health Organization's response to the coronavirus pandemic. And to make a long story short, the panel says that the World Health Organization should have more power during an outbreak. What they're really saying is the World Health Organization wants to control your life throughout the world, and you have to give up your sovereignty as a citizen for the World Health Organization to take control of your life. And Mr. Producer, I heard him in the background. He said, "Kiss my ass." And I want you to know, my lips are puckering already. Anyway, if you think that this is a good thing, you know that they weren't happy about the way the World Health Organization dealt with this pandemic. Wait till the next one comes. We'll see how this works out. So I just thought I'd mention that. Your freedom, your safety, and your security are the most important things you have. You know, government is sovereign. Governments are sovereign entities, and they have to figure out a way to deal internationally with these sovereign entities that are different governments. The sovereignty of Israel is the same as the sovereignty of Russia, China, the United States. Big countries, small countries are all sovereigns. So when we talk about giving up your rights, your freedoms, your liberty, we're talking about your sovereignty, because according to our Constitution, every citizen is a sovereign citizen, guaranteed all of the things available from the Creator. Now, I went to Catholic school. I was shocked one day in elementary school when the nun said, "We don't know what God is. We don't know who it is. There's no way we can figure it out, but we know this stuff had to come from somewhere, and that's what we call God." I won't argue with that. I have to agree. We don't know where these things came from, but we do know that existence is a mystery. And so because of that, we are sovereign. God, the Creator, gave us these rights. Now, in order for us to live together, we have agreed to to give up some portions of our God-given rights, our Creator-given rights at birth, or maybe even before birth. Who knows? Maybe at the time of conception, these rights are bestowed upon us. And that's maybe another story one day, but if we have these rights, when do we acquire them? When we come out of the birth canal, or maybe when we're created by the Creator? Well, okay, I don't want you to give up your sovereignty, but you've given some of it up already just by creating the state of Nevada and the United States, by our previous forefathers and foremothers. But I want you to know, this was an article that came out in the Las Vegas Review-Journal, January 28th of 2021. And when I read this, I thought to myself, oh, how gracious of them, these deities sitting on the dais, to allow us to have verbal input at the meeting. And according to this article, written by Alexandra Appleton, the Clark County School Board will allow spoken public comments at its meeting Thursday for the first time since the pandemic shuttered the boardroom's doors in March. And so the public can record their comments for playback. What I like, well, let me just say this. If you have an opinion and you go before public comment and you state your opinion, you are entitled, as I understand it by state law, to express your opinion during public comment. Now, if you go to a school board meeting in Pahrump, they had rules that said that you could not disparage a board member, you couldn't say anything bad about them, and all kinds of stuff that you couldn't do. What, you're supposed to go in there and praise everybody for the great job they did? Why is it parents constantly complain about their students' education? Why do some teachers complain? You have a right to express your opinion and to have it recorded in the minutes. State law. County commissioners have to do it. School boards have to do it. You just have to bring in your written statement and read it out loud to them, and then request that it be inserted in the minutes in its entirety and give them your statement. And if you haven't done that, you ought to try it one time, because when it comes down, and I got to tell you, this happened at the county commission meetings here. And I had turned in one or two written statements and they never appeared in the minutes. So I went online and I downloaded a copy of the state law that said they had to take it and put it in the minutes. So I went to Angela Bello when she was at one of the meetings, and I said, look, I'm going to be reading a statement, and I'm going to give you a copy of the written statement for the clerk to insert it into the minutes. I want my words verbatim that I said in the minutes. And so I read it, and I gave it to her, and she passed it over to the county clerk, Sam Merlino. And the meeting continued on. Then it came to the commissioner's comments, and Commissioner Shinhofen, God rest his soul. Oh, not yet. Well, I can wait. He asked the DA, Angela Bello, he said, wait a minute, we've never done this. Do we have to do that? And her response was, we will be adding them to the minutes. Now, Commissioner Shinhofen really didn't want to see that happening, because that was actually the words of us as the public, as the sovereigns in front of them, telling them what we think. Now, sometimes it could be good. Sometimes it doesn't have to be good. Sometimes it's an idea about how we think they should do things. It's okay. Either way. But it had to be in the minutes. So what did they do? You know, there's an agenda sequence, and every time you get into that item in the agenda, everything that takes place during that item at that time that's the sequence in the minutes when you look at the minutes. But not the public comment. You may be there at the beginning of the meeting, and the public comment we wound up at the very bottom of the minutes, if at all. If you want to run a test, go to a county commission meeting and make some comments. It doesn't matter what they are. Just go there and speak your piece. Tell them how great they are. Tell them all the commissioners do a wonderful job, and you hate to see some of them retire or not. And then hand it in and ask publicly to have it included in the minutes. And then when the minutes come out 3 months later, look to see if it's there. Can you imagine it takes 3 months, 2 to 3 months to get the minutes out? People forget. But I just wanted to thank the Nye County School Board for allowing public comment with some restrictions. No, if it's your opinion, you're allowed to express it, and you should. As a matter of fact, do you know when the county school board meets, or where they're meeting? Probably not. I doubt that many people show up. And yet, and in my opinion, you can't complain if you don't show up. The trouble is, when you show up and you speak your piece, sometimes it falls on deaf ears. That's a wonderful feeling. Why go? You hear people say it all the time. Why should I go to the meeting? Unless you get a big crowd show up. It's like it's water off a duck's back. And speaking of ducks, I had a couple of them in my driveway last week. Can you imagine in the desert we had ducks? I think they were lost. Okay, I have one little technical item I'd like to kind of talk about. And, you know, I mentioned a little earlier in the show. Let me give you the phone number here. It's 775-990-4900. That's 990-4900, just in case. And I have a background in radio and television from the technical standpoint of repair. And I have watched it ever since I was a little 5-year-old kid. As a matter of fact, when I was 2 years old, well, actually, I wasn't even two, but I remember sitting in my parents' bedroom, and my father owned a radio and TV store in Manhattan. And he brought home a device that he could cut a record at home. And I remember seeing the record stylus grooving out that plain vinyl. And when it was done, it had my voice on it as a little baby. I still have it. It was amazing to me. So all my life, I have been around these technical things. And the reason I'm bringing it up, I wanted to talk a little bit about 5G, because 5G is here. Well, it's not here I'm told that there is one company that has 5G in Peru. That may be the case. But I wanted to go beyond that because once 5G was announced, the next thing you know, they're already talking about developing 6G. And there were many people who were concerned about 5G uh, technology being harmful to the human body. It's a frequency that we do not well if we're around it. Now, I don't know the truth about that, but I know a lot of people have talked about it. So now they say 6G, though, is going to work differently, and it will be much faster. Much faster. How fast can it get? Well, I was wondering about that. How fast can it get? I have to tell you, I get all these magazines, and I've mentioned it before, of various technical issues. And they're talking here in this latest magazine. This one is called Photonics and Imaging Technology. And in this article, they're talking about testing 800G direct modulated optical signaling. Whoa, what does that mean? It means they're testing to see how fast they can run the frequencies when they're setting up these high-speed internet deals. So 5G sounds like it's really fast, and it can't, compared to 300 baud, which it used to be. I mean, if you were down, I remember I went to, I bought some software to download a picture off the internet. And when I started to download, it was 12 hours before the full picture got downloaded. I could watch it actually pixel by pixel going up on the screen. Today, you download a picture, it's almost instantaneous. 5G is going to be even faster. And then we're talking in here about 8G. Now, what happens? I want to talk a little about that. When you watch a TV screen, it has to scan. It's not one big picture. It's a scan back and forth 500 times a second in order to produce the picture. So there's a little line that goes across, basically, and that scan has to happen that often to get a picture that you can watch. So 30 times a second, you have to get a full scan 30 times for a little, so it's not jumpy or, it's nice and smooth. So when I saw this article, I thought, well, let me take a look at what they're talking about here. And they're talking about getting faster. And at the end of this, I'm going to tell you how fast one of the items goes. So the state-of-the-art systems today operate in excess of, by the way, there's a difference between bits and bytes. A byte is 8 and a bit, or it could be more, and a bit is 1. Okay. So state-of-the-art systems today operate in excess of 50 gigabit baud. That is, the light must, now when you do computer and you do digital technology, you're talking about ones and zeros or on and off signals. Light is much faster than electricity because a photon is much, 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 much lighter than an electron. So you can manipulate it quicker. So state-of-the-art systems today operate in excess of 50 gigabit baud. That is, the light must be turned on and off at the transmitter at a rate of 50 billion times a second. I have trouble getting around 50 billion times a second, but that's what happens. And the receiver, your television set or whatever it is we're using, must detect that the light is either on or off, and a lower quality transmitter may be slow. So that's an amazing number to me. But when they're talking about 800, they're talking about much, much faster speed. And I'm not going to get into the technical aspects of it because you're already falling asleep on this one. But when we talk about the technology to do things, it's amazing. We have no clue what goes on with engineering to come up with the stuff they've got today. We worry about paying the bills every month. Listen, the stuff going on today with technology is scary. One of these shows, we're going to do something about on an upcoming show about all the new weapons of war, what uh, what government is asking companies to research and develop for them. I'm sure you might find it interesting because there are things going on today that just blow your mind. Plus, who knows? Maybe there really are aliens from another planet. Maybe they're not even from another planet. Maybe they're here from another dimension. You know what? There was a recent show that said that they think that might have happened. That Eisenhower actually met with somebody named, oh gosh, it went away. I had it. I didn't write it down. It'll come back tonight when I go to sleep. All right. Well, I promised at breakfast this morning. By the way, I don't do it. I kind of moderate a breakfast every Thursday morning at the museum. And we talk about all kinds of things that have to do with Nye County. And believe me, there's a lot to talk about. Some of it's really good, and some of it may not be as good as really good. But I promised this morning that I was going to tie three things together in an explanation. And the three things are this. I was going to talk about abortion and my view of it. I always have to say these are my views so that the station doesn't have a problem. Immigration, how abortion ties up with immigration, and about, as a real estate broker, rental properties. And I am going to do that. How many babies do you think have been born? What's the status of baby births in the United States? These numbers were provided in an article. And according to the article, the birth rate in the United States has fallen by about 15% since its peak in 2007. Now, the article did not get into some more specifics, and that's where I'm going to go. I always wanted to have a law I could understand. I always wanted to have the basic concepts about how a law is created. And I think I'm pretty good at understanding that. I've made some mistakes about understanding in the past when the lawyers were able to explain to me on a school board and some other places that we don't know what we're talking about, even though we could read the English language quite well. But you learn as you go along how these things work. And I would like to see some fixes to the English law, the American law that we live by, so that we as citizens have a better understanding. You know, when somebody goes to school, is there a course at the high school in the senior year about how the law works, about how you should conduct yourself when confronted by the law enforcement? I can't recall ever learning that. I got out of school. I didn't have a clue. And I went to a school for college prep. It was a Catholic. Boy, you want to talk about college prep in a school. Go to a Catholic school. You'll be ready. As a matter of fact, the reason I didn't go back to college when I got out of high school was I'd already had the courses I would have had to take in science and math. And I decided, why would I go to college? Give me the credit. I've already done it. No, you had to go back, so I didn't go. Went in the Air Force instead. Anyway, that's another story. But I think there should be some simpler explanations about how the law, some basic concepts in the law. So that's what I want to talk about here. the basic concept in these three topics that I just mentioned. And again, the number is 775-990-4900. So let me go through the rental issue first. As a real estate broker, we know that when a person rents a property, a house or an apartment or whatever it is, they technically they have all the rights of ownership except for one. Well, I shouldn't say that. They do not have the right to sell the property because they're a tenant, and they do not have the right to destroy the property because it isn't theirs, but they have rights. They have rights of access, the rights of freedom, and the right to not do damage to the property. I kind of like that understanding. I think that's a very clear explanation about renting versus ownership. When you own the property, you have a right to sell it. You have a right to lease it out to a tenant. A tenant could sublease a property, but they have to get the permission of the owner. So these things kind of tie together. And I've been a tenant, and I've also been, never been a landlord. Well, I shouldn't say that, but that's a different day. So when you look at this, a person gets to move into that, let's say, move into a duplex. A person gets to move into a duplex or a single family home, and they can do anything they want in that house, unless there's something written specifically in the contract, which by law a person would be allowed to write. But they cannot commit harm. So that's my thinking about how tenancy works. It's very basic, it's very simple. The lawyers can get in there and create all kinds of problems and write laws to screw stuff up. But the simple fact is, when you're a tenant and you are renting a property, you have all the rights of ownership except the simple ones that I just mentioned. You can have relatives come visit with you. Now, the lease may say you can't have more than 4 people in the house or the apartment or whatever the number is, and that's legitimate because you can't have crowding. That's very unsafe. You can't have a fire in the building, that kind of stuff. Now, let's say a woman has become pregnant. And in becoming pregnant, what actually took place? At what point in it's my body and I will do with it what I want? At what point does that right become a responsibility? I mean, I look at it as if you became pregnant and it's accidental, there are 2 people responsible for that. A man and a woman. And for the woman to be able to say to that man, it's my body and I'll do what I want with it, that's not how it worked. They both agreed they were going to have a party in their pants. And as a result of that, they created a child. Well, maybe it's not a full-grown child, but did that entity that they created, did that entity have rights from the creator? Or did those rights come from the government? When somebody says to me, it's my body and I'll do what I want with it, okay, then we should apply that to everybody's body. There are no special circumstances. But the circumstance is, it's your body and you can do what you want with it, but don't create waste. So when you and your boyfriend or your husband or whatever it is created a pregnancy, you assume a responsibility. You should not be able to say to yourself, I don't want to be responsible. Once you decide you're not responsible, it will never leave your head. And I think for many people, it will bother them to the day they die. There may be other ways to deal with the issue of the pregnancy, but I told you about the article here about the birth rate dropping by 15%. Now, what happens when the birth rate drops to 15%? Because you know what? They've been aborting all these babies, and I consider that murder. I think anytime somebody when a woman is pregnant, she's got a living thing inside her body that was created by her and her spouse or her quote unquote sperm donor. And it's her responsibility, just like I used to think that the mother's body uh, created the child. Once the egg was fertilized, that the mother's body nurtured that egg or whatever it became. And then I learned that's not the case. As I matured and got older and learned, it turned out that the baby took over the mother's body. That little egg took control of the mother's body in order for it to grow into a full-term human being. To me, what that said is that baby became the tenant in the mother's body. Just like you, when you went to rent an apartment or a house as a tenant, that baby became a tenant in the mother's body. That's how I see it. Now, the baby can exist in the mother's body as long as it does no harm. And there are times when the baby will let the mother know that it's there. And it will signal the mother about certain requirements nutritionally the baby needs. Or there's a whole bunch of things that go on. But the baby has actually taken control of that portion of the house body, if you will. Now, when in a rental, the landlord can't just evict somebody for no good reason. But a woman who thinks it's her body and only her body wants to evict that tenant is a crime. That's how I see it. Now, what happens? And we don't know the long-term effects here. We only know the short-term. And when you talk to a lot of people, it's a very selfish thing that they do when they do this abortion. And to look at pictures of aborted babies, I can remember living in Chino Hills, and one day they found a cardboard box with tiny babies that had been aborted, dumped on the side of the highway. What a sad thing to think that somebody would do that. Okay, so not to get into the weeds on it, the way our actuarials being the study of what's going to happen, the way we look at this is we created a thing called Social Security, and we created welfare, and we created some other beneficial things, supposedly beneficial. It's kind of like a Ponzi scheme. As long as the population kept growing, those who retired would have enough people working in the system to support their Social Security benefits when they retired. After all, they paid into it all their life, so why not? And I can remember having conversations with people when I worked in Long Island as a young man, that people said they agreed with the Social Security idea because they were willing to pay into Social Security for the people who never paid in because the system would work for them when they got older to retire. Now, at that time, they didn't think people would live as long as they do, but they do now. People are living to 100. You read about it all the time. Many, many people live to their 90s. You read about that in the obituaries. So what happens? They needed to have continuous population growth in order to feed the Social Security system. But what happened is when you start having a reduction in population, you start looking at how long will Social Security last. Not as long as you thought if things keep going the way they are. So what's the solution? The solution is we have to boost the population, but we can't boost it because we're murdering the future population of this country. The very people who live here are murdering the future population of this country, and they don't seem to understand they're getting ready to do in their financial system. So what's the solution? The solution is we got to find some people to take the place of all those people we killed. Now we're talking immigration. And the argument about immigration is we need to have people coming in who are ready to assume the responsibilities of citizenship. But when the people coming in are coming in so fast and furious, they can just walk in and leave. And we never even know they came, a lot of them. And when the numbers are staggering, why are these numbers so big? Because, in my opinion, they need to boost the population because we're not having as many kids as we should. Because that's what we've done legally. And government has seen to it that that happened. The lawyers have seen to it that it happened. So now you have unfettered, unrestricted immigration into this country from who knows where and who knows what. So I think that the example of rentals, abortion, and immigration tie together. And why don't we just have one standard law that applies to everything simply? If you have a baby, you're the landlord, the baby's the tenant until the baby's ready to leave, which is 9 months. You have to accommodate that baby just like you would have to accommodate a tenant in a rental property. And if you choose to kill off those future citizens, you're really destroying the economy of this country. Maybe not instantaneously, but as you go on further and further, you're damaging the country. One digit at a time, one bite, one bit at a time. So we have to bring in a whole slew of new people. And they want to come here because they've heard so many things about the United States. But not everybody's coming here to do good. Many are coming here to do bad stuff. And we know it because it's been in the news. Now, maybe you don't agree with my perception, but I do think that if we had a simple rule that said that the landlord-tenancy law, simplified the way I've described it, also applies to pregnancy because it's very similar in nature. You wouldn't have to write multiple laws. You just understand how the system works, how the rule works. I mean, you can have you can have roads, and when you drive vehicles, all the vehicles are different, but they're all on the same road. We all follow the rules. Well, when you don't, you have problems. And we don't really know the long-term effect of aborting a baby as often as we do. I'm talking about health of the mother or health of future generations. The body is a very complex thing. But in its complexity, there's simplicity. And I think every baby that's been created by a man and a woman, that the man and woman have an obligation to see that baby to full term and to allow it to grow. And if you think that that's wrong and it's your body and you want to do what you want with it, then why can't I have suicide as a way of dealing with life? Why can't I have end of life without having to go to court and ask for it? Why is it that when somebody became a murderer, we have to give them life in prison when they're a threat to society because they've crossed that barrier? We need to simplify the law so we can all understand it. Maybe we'll have another conversation about this on another show. But for now, that's how I see it. It's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. So if you want to join us at the breakfast, it's every Thursday morning, 7:30 at the museum on Basin, just west of 160. And with that, my name's Andy Alberti. I've enjoyed having the show today and enjoyed having you as an audience. At that point, I'm out of here.